On the occasion of the founding of the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army, speech at the ceremony to found the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army April 25th, 1932. Today we are organizing the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army in order to crush the brigandish Japanese imperialists through an armed struggle and achieve the historic cause of national liberation. It is over 20 years since the Japanese imperialists occupied our homeland. Our country, a golden tapestry of 3,000 rai, has now become a complete colony under the hooves of the Japanese imperialists. Our people, with their 5,000-year-long history and brilliant culture, are harshly exploited and oppressed as colonial slaves. The misfortunes of our country and people are multiplying as Japanese imperialism becomes more and more ambitious in its continental invasion. Last September, the Japanese imperialists occupied Manchuria by provoking an aggressive war. Hell-bent on spreading their aggression across the continent, their white terror against the Korean people is becoming even more outrageous. In an attempt to turn Korea into a solid rear for their continental aggression, the Japanese imperialists have gone so far as to deprive our people of all their elementary political freedoms, freedom of speech, the press, and association, and are blocking their revolutionary advance at the point of the bayonet, indulging in wholesale arrest, imprisonment, and massacre of innocent people everywhere. The brutalities of the Japanese imperialists against the Korean people have reached the extreme in the east and other parts of Manchuria. For the purpose of thwarting our people's anti-Japanese struggle, they raid the Korean settlements every day, running amok to kill all, burn all, and plunder all. Thus, our compatriots, deprived of their country, are being slaughtered even in this alien land. The situation demands that our people face the alternative to die on their knees or to rise up and fight to survive. Our people have now risen with determination and are fighting everywhere in the teeth of the Japanese imperialists' barbarities. The workers and peasants are responding with violence to counter the fascist repression of Japanese imperialism, and groups of active patriotic youths are seeking a new way of struggle. Today, in this lean spring season, more than 100,000 peasants, led by young Korean communists, have begun fighting the Japanese imperialists, their lackeys, and the reactionary landlords in Yanji, Wanking, Helong, Huncheon, and many other places along the Tumen River. The Chinese people, too, are putting up a vigorous struggle against Japanese imperialism. They have launched an anti-Japanese national salvation movement against the seizure of Manchuria by the Japanese imperialists. They have formed the Anti-Japanese National Salvation Army, anti-Japanese volunteers, and other nationalist anti-Japanese units in eastern Manchuria and many other places. All these developments testified to the correctness of the line of armed struggle we put forward in Kowloon, Chungcheon County 2 years ago. In fact, now is the best moment, the most appropriate time for us to organize massive revolutionary armed forces and wage a full-scale armed struggle. We, young communists, and the revolutionary people have laid the groundwork for the formation of a people's guerrilla army through a long, bloody struggle. In July 1930, we formed the Korean Revolutionary Army as the first step in preparation for the armed struggle. The KRE was the first Marxist-Leninist armed organization in our country. Members of the KRE went to many urban and rural areas and conducted vigorous political and military activities among the workers, peasants, youth, and students, preparing to form the guerrilla army. Later, we formed the Young Communist League and many other revolutionary organizations in various localities. We also organized the Red Guards everywhere, a paramilitary organization, as well as guerrilla teams, though not large, in many parts of eastern Manchuria. By speeding up preparations for founding a guerrilla army in this way, we have laid a solid basis for the formation of the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army. We have made great efforts to train the organizational backbone of the AJPGA. We tightened organizational life among the members of the KRA, YCL, and AWIL Anti-Imperialist Youth League to temper their minds and willpower more firmly in a revolutionary way, and to encourage them to accumulate the valuable experience needed for revolutionary struggle. One of the important questions in preparing the organization of the AJPGA was to improve relations with the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units. As a result of the May 30 uprising, engineered by the left adventurists, and the Wanbaoshan incident, framed by the Japanese imperialists to play off the Chinese people against the Korean people and provide a pretext for invading Manchuria. Some of the Chinese people and nationalist anti-Japanese units in Manchuria had misunderstood the Korean people and communists at one time. They were hostile to the Korean people and communists and did harm to them, while in Korea some hooligans, at the instigation of the Japanese imperialists, launched an anti-Chinese campaign. This aggravated relations between the Korean and Chinese peoples most critically. Nevertheless, we went to the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units and worked there patiently, showing them at the risk of our lives practical examples of fighting resolutely against the Japanese imperialists. Thus, we considerably improved relations between the Korean and Chinese peoples and helped some Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units, once hostile to us, dispel their standing and join us in the anti-Japanese struggle. We have endeavored to awaken the masses politically and unite them organizationally. In this way, we have laid solid foundations among the revolutionized masses for armed struggle in many rural areas along the Tumen River. Drawing on the successes achieved in preparing to form a People's Guerrilla Army, we are now organizing the Anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army, the first Marxist-Leninist revolutionary armed force in our country, and proclaiming its foundation. The AJPGA is made up of the workers, peasants, and young patriots who oppose the Japanese imperialists and their stooges and love their country and people. It is a revolutionary armed force which will dedicate itself to protecting the interests of the people. The aim and mission of the People's Guerrilla Army is to overthrow the colonial rule of Japanese imperialism in Korea and bring national independence and social emancipation to the Korean people. The foundation of the AJPGA provides us with the motive power which will directly undertake and push forward the armed struggle, the mainstream of the anti-Japanese national liberation movement in our country, and with the possibility of dealing decisive blows at the Japanese imperialist aggressors and advancing the anti-Japanese national liberation struggle to a higher stage. The foundation of the AJPGA will open up a new phase of implementing the line of the anti-Japanese United Front and the policy for founding a Marxist-Leninist party by greatly invigorating and encouraging the Korean people who are groaning under the colonial yoke imposed on them by Japanese imperialism, and by inspiring them to engage in the anti-Japanese struggle. Comrades, we must apply ourselves to the armed struggle and launch it on a full-scale basis as required by the prevailing situation. To this end, we must first build up the strength of the AJPGA. Only when it is strengthened to the point at which it becomes a large revolutionary armed force can the People's Guerrilla Army give a decisive blow to the counter-revolutionary armed forces of the Japanese imperialists, develop the armed struggle in scope and strength, and increase its influence so as to further promote the Korean Revolution as a whole. In order to consolidate the guerrilla army, all its commanding officers and men should be boundlessly loyal to the revolution. A high degree of revolutionary determination and infinite loyalty to the revolution are the source of the strength of the People's Guerrilla Army, and a decisive guarantee of its triumph over Japanese imperialism. So all its commanders and rank and file must equip themselves thoroughly with Marxism-Leninism and the strategy and tactics of the Korean Revolution through diligent political studies and constantly temper themselves in the struggle. In this way, they will acquire a firm revolutionary world outlook and be faithful to the revolution in any adversity. In addition, they should cherish each other, secure unbreakable unity of ideology and purpose, and defend the vital interests of the masses, maintaining close ties as their own kin with them. They must also observe iron discipline, so as to give full play to their excellent political and moral character as soldiers of a true people's army, a revolutionary army. If we are to win our battle against the Japanese imperialist marauders, we must expand the guerrilla ranks as quickly as possible. In order to do this, we should first enlist large numbers of progressive young patriots tested in practical struggle. This is the way to make the People's Guerrilla Army a true people's army, a revolutionary army. While expanding the guerrilla ranks, we must obtain more weapons. Patriotism alone will not be enough to defeat the Japanese imperialists armed with highly effective modern weapons. In order to vanquish the armed enemy, we must arm ourselves. We must constantly improve the weapons and equipment of the guerrillas by capturing weapons from the enemy through surprise attacks, as well as by making them for ourselves. To further strengthen the AJPGA, its commanders and men must acquire adroit guerrilla tactics and apply them with skill. Mastery of these tactics will enable them to cripple, with a small force, a numerically and technically superior enemy, destroy them, and also capture their weapons. At present, the commanders and the rank and file of the guerrilla army are not well versed in guerrilla warfare. Worse still, we have no experience of guerrilla warfare that can be of use to us in our fight against the Japanese imperialists, having no home front and no regular army support. Therefore, we have to accumulate combat experience and create one guerrilla tactic after another through ceaseless battles. We should make it a basic principle of guerrilla warfare to wipe out as many enemy troops as possible while preserving the guerrilla force to the maximum. To do this, we should correctly assess the situation and the balance of forces between friend and foe, and, on this basis, engage the enemy only when we are sure of victory. While taking the initiative in carrying on active battles, we must manage to get the proper combination of preserving the strength of the guerrillas and destroying the enemy. In order to wipe out large numbers of enemy troops while preserving its own forces, the guerrilla army should correctly grasp the enemy's weak points and use them to its own advantage. The Japanese imperialist troops have weaknesses inherent in aggressors, and many other vulnerabilities and limitations. For instance, they are unfamiliar with the geographical conditions of this area. By actively exacerbating these weaknesses and making the best use of them, we must keep the enemy on the defensive and destroy their forces ceaselessly, ambushing and attacking them everywhere. Next, we must strive to establish guerrilla zones along the Tumen River on the northern tip of Korea and in eastern Manchuria to facilitate the operations of the People's Guerrilla Army. Under the present circumstances, I think, Tumen area is best suited for guerrilla bases, in view of the geographical conditions and the makeup of the population. We must work out a policy on further expanding the guerrilla bases and developing guerrilla actions in future, in close coordination with the Korean Independence Army, active in the area, along the Amnok River, and in southern Manchuria. Meanwhile, we must gradually bring the revolutionary bases nearer to the homeland, maintaining closer organizational ties with revolutionary bodies at home. In addition, we must work harder to form an anti-Japanese united front with the Chinese people. For this purpose, we must form an anti-Japanese allied front with the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units. They are an armed force which can join us in fighting against Japanese imperialism, the common enemy of the Korean and Chinese peoples. The nationalist anti-Japanese units make up a considerable armed force. They are engaged in military activities, holding wide areas of Manchuria. That is why an allied front of the People's Guerrilla Army and the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units is very important for further isolating and weakening the Japanese imperialist forces of aggression and for assuring the definitive ascendancy of the anti-Japanese armed forces. We have already improved our relations with them to a certain degree through tireless and patient work. However, the relationship between the People's Guerrilla Army and the nationalist anti-Japanese units has not yet reached the stage at which a full-scale anti-Japanese allied front can be formed. Some officers and men of these units, deceived by the Japanese imperialist scheme to alienate nations from each other, are hostile towards the Korean Communists and the AJPGA. We must, therefore, continue to work on the nationalist anti-Japanese units with patience and persistence. In order to step up our activities among the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units, we must first of all form more special detachments of Korean communists and enhance their role. Since the guerrillas are not yet strong enough, and some officers and men of the nationalist anti-Japanese units are antagonistic to the Korean communists and the People's Guerrilla Army, we must improve our relations with the anti-Japanese units through the activities of the special detachments and prepare step by step for a full-scale anti-Japanese allied front by building up the People's Guerrilla Army. The special detachments must penetrate the nationalist anti-Japanese units and fight together with them, and convince their officers and men through persuasion and practical examples that the Korean communists and the anti-Japanese people's guerrillas are genuine patriots and fighters who are courageous in battle against the Japanese aggressors, so as to help them to have a correct understanding of the Korean communists and take an active part in the anti-Japanese struggle. With a view to improving our work with the nationalist anti-Japanese units, we must also enhance the role of the Committee of Anti-Japanese Soldiers. Our work with the nationalist anti-Japanese units is expanding every day, So it is a matter of the utmost urgency to elevate the role of this committee, which is engaged exclusively in work with these units. The Committee of Anti-Japanese Soldiers must coordinate efforts to grasp and solve problems arising in the work with the nationalist anti-Japanese units and promptly correct possible deviations. If we are to succeed in our work with these units, we must actively involve all the people's guerrillas and the broad sections of the revolutionary masses in this work and conduct it as a great mass movement. This will dissipate prejudice against the Koreans and the Korean communists. Further, the People's Guerrilla Army must work well with the masses so that it can strengthen its ties of kinship with them and enjoy their active support and encouragement in battle. We are now fighting against formidable Japanese imperialism under difficult circumstances, with neither a home front nor foreign aid. We must believe only in our united strength and have the firm conviction that we can defeat the enemy by our own strength. By our own strength, I mean the organized and united masses of the people. We must believe precisely in the strength of the organized and united people and carry on guerrilla warfare, relying on their strength. The ties of kinship with the masses of the people and their active support and encouragement are the source of the strength of the People's Guerrilla Army and a major guarantee of victory. The People's Guerrillas, therefore, must firmly establish in their ranks a correct revolutionary viewpoint and attitude towards the masses, and a discipline of zealously protecting the lives and property of the people. They must fight at any time, relying on the strength of the masses of the people and firmly protect the people's interests. In addition, the AJPGA must apply itself to organizational and political work among the masses of the Korean and Chinese peoples, so that it will win every support and encouragement from them. It must vigorously develop political struggle against Japanese imperialism everywhere, along with armed struggle. Comrades, we are the first contingent of the proud anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army, with the mission of shaping the destiny of the country and the people. The future of the country and the people depends entirely on how we fight. We must carry out our duty to the country and the people with credit, surmounting whatever difficulties and obstacles may arise. Let us all raise higher the red banner of the revolution and launch a vigorous armed struggle against Japanese imperialism in order to win the historic cause of national liberation. On spreading and developing the armed struggle into the homeland. Speech at the meeting of chiefs of underground revolutionary organizations and political workers in the Onsong area. March 11th, 1933. Comrades, we are gathered here, in the homeland, with the chiefs of underground revolutionary organizations and political workers to discuss measures to win the historic cause of national liberation as soon as possible. This meeting bears great significance. You've done a great deal of work, inspired by the founding of the guerrilla army and the establishment of the guerrilla bases. In the first place, you have worked hard to step up anti-Japanese information work among the people at home and unite them into revolutionizations. As a result, the anti-Japanese spirit of the masses is rising every day, and the membership of these revolutionary organizations is increasing rapidly. You have also striven to support the guerrilla army. Despite the enemy's strict watch, the revolutionary organizations in the homeland have sent a large amount of cloth, footwear, paper, medicine, and other supplies to the guerrillas. This has encouraged them greatly. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to you for this moral and material support. Comrades, it is 23 years since the Japanese imperialist aggressors occupied our beautiful country, a golden tapestry of 3,000 rai. The Japanese imperialists are intensifying their colonial rule with passing day. Particularly, they are making the most frantic efforts to extricate themselves from the general economic crisis of the capitalist world, which has lasted for several years. They are trying to find a way out of the economic crisis, above all, by harshly exploiting and plundering the Korean workers and peasants. The living conditions of the Korean workers and peasants are worsening because of the ruthless exploitation and plunder by the Japanese imperialists and their stooges. The Korean workers, who had been forced to engage in cheap slave labor since the Japanese imperialists' occupation, were deprived of their jobs during the economic crisis and are hovering on the verge of starvation. The peasants are barely subsisting on grass roots and tree bark due to high farm rents, onerous taxes, and a severe slump in the prices of agricultural produce, caused by the colonial rule of Japanese imperialism and the economic crisis. They are deprived of their dearly loved children by the landlords and capitalists because of debts or have their property seized. Tragedies of this sort are increasing daily. Having lost their jobs or been deprived of their land, many workers and peasants are leaving in droves for Japan and Manchuria to seek a livelihood. But wherever they go, they find no solace, and poverty stalks them like a ghost. The brutal exploitation and oppression by the Japanese imperialist blackguards and their lackeys is precipitating class fragmentation in our country. In towns, the middle class is sinking into the proletariat, and in the countryside, landed peasants are becoming tenants. The Japanese imperialists have embarked on aggression in China in order to free themselves from the economic crisis. The Japanese imperialists, who have occupied Manchuria by force of arms, are making frenzied preparations for continental aggression, maintaining an extremely tyrannical, medieval rule to turn Korea and Manchuria into their solid rear. They have reinforced there troops and police on a large scale and deprived our people of all their rights. They do not tolerate the slightest expression of freedom. They are running amok to stamp out the anti-Japanese struggle of our people and erase any aspiration for national independence. In Manchuria, under the pretext of maintaining public peace and mopping up the communists, they are engrossed in atrocities, arresting, imprisoning, and murdering Korean and Chinese anti-Japanese fighters, setting fire to villages inhabited by Koreans, and slaughtering innocent people at random, irrespective of age or sex. As the fascist suppression by the Japanese imperialists has been intensified, and the possibility of any legal, political, or social activity ruled out, many of our workers, peasants, youth, and students have risen up resolutely in the struggle against the Japanese imperialists all over the country, And in northeast China, the Chinese people have turned out a violent mass struggle against the armed Japanese imperialists. We have achieved no little success in the last 1 year of struggle since the foundation of the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army. Through this struggle, our AJPGA has been rapidly expanded and strengthened. We have steadily enlarged the ranks of the guerrilla army, with the vigorous youth who, at the inspiring news of the founding of the guerrilla army, joined the guerrillas, resolved to take part in the armed struggle, with the young people in the guerrilla bases and with the workers, peasants, and young intellectuals, tested and tempered in the struggle against Japanese imperialism. While wresting weapons from the enemy and arming ourselves with them, we worked energetically to make other weapons by our own efforts. As a result, the ranks of our guerrilla army have been expanded and its armament base further strengthened. The guerrillas have accumulated a wealth of experience and have been further tempered in the course of bloody battles against the enemy. While waging hard battles to smite the Japanese imperialist robbers, our guerrillas have experienced the rigors of revolutionary struggle and have been further trained mentally and physically to overcome any difficulties or trials. The guerrilla army had had no instructive experience of guerrilla warfare and started the struggle from scratch. But in the course of battle, it acquired diverse guerrilla tactics to make large numbers of the enemy vulnerable and crush them with small forces. The advance into southern and northern Manchuria, which we guerrillas made for half a year since last summer, holds an especially important place in strengthening the AJPGA into a revolutionary armed force. By that march, we guerrillas demonstrated the might of the AJPGA to many people in the vast areas of southern and northern Manchuria, convincing them of victory and exerting a revolutionary influence on them. In this way, we drew many compatriots into revolutionary organizations. Meanwhile, we were successful in forming an anti-Japanese allied front with the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units, which had been hostile towards the Korean communists owing to their own political backwardness and to the Japanese imperialist policy of alienating nations from each other. Another major success we have achieved in the past year was the establishment of guerrilla bases and, relying on them, the conduct of active military operations and political work, thus giving a heavy blow to the enemy. Starting last spring, we have established reliable guerrilla bases across the vast area along the Tumen River. These bases have revolutionary organizations, revolutionary governments, people who support the guerrillas devotedly, as well as weapons repair shops, hospitals and other facilities serving the guerrillas in the rear. Thus, we guerrillas, who have to fight the Japanese imperialist blackguards without any home front and without any regular army support, now have a military, political and logistical base, and our people, the strategic base of the Korean Revolution. Relying on the guerrilla bases established in the vast area along the Tumen River, we have dealt heavy political and military blows at the enemy along the border, thus exerting a revolutionary influence on the people in the homeland and inspiring them to anti-Japanese struggle. As a result, various forms of anti-Japanese struggle are being waged ceaselessly in all parts of the homeland, under the impact of the anti-Japanese armed struggle. Alarmed at the intensified political and military activities of the guerrillas, the Japanese imperialists are making frantic efforts to destroy them and their bases while they are still in their formative stage. They have set up the Jiandao Task Force with infantry, cavalry, artillery, and engineering units and thrown them into eastern Manchuria. Last January, especially, the top brass of the Japanese imperialist army and police held a joint conference to consult about intensifying the punitive offensive. The enemy is now frantically making punitive attacks on our bases, mobilizing massive numbers of troops. While intensifying their military offensive in this way, the Japanese imperialists are making a vicious attempt to blockade the bases economically. With the sinister design of cutting off food and munitions supplies to the guerrilla units, they are burning down all the villages around our bases, keeping an eye on people's movements, and strictly controlling provisions of food, cloth, salt, matches, and other consumer goods. The Japanese imperialists are also constantly infiltrating spies, wreckers, and saboteurs into the guerrilla bases to disorganize the guerrillas from within. At the same time, they are making desperate efforts to reinforce the guard along the border, concentrating huge armed forces there in an attempt to stifle the revolutionary influence of the anti-Japanese armed struggle before it can reach the people in the homeland. While peppering the whole border area with police installations, they are building all sorts of defenses and keeping a strict watch. This situation urgently demands that we frustrate the frantic moves of Japanese imperialism and expand and develop the anti-Japanese armed struggle, holding the red banner of revolution still higher. In this connection, the guerrillas' advance into the homeland is of great significance. By marching into the homeland, we guerrillas can consolidate the achievements already made and deal crushing political and military blows at the Japanese imperialists who have occupied our beautiful country and are forcing all sorts of misfortune on our people. In this way, we will enable the anti-Japanese armed struggle to exert a strong revolutionary influence on the people in the homeland and rouse them vigorously to a sacred war against Japanese imperialism, thus finally liquidating the bulwark of colonial rule by Japanese imperialism. Therefore, we must expand and develop our anti-Japanese armed struggle to the homeland, however vicious the enemy's moves and however difficult the situation. To do this, we should wage a more forceful struggle to establish and consolidate more semi-guerrilla zones over a wide area of the homeland, adjacent to the guerrilla bases along the Tumen River. By a semi-guerrilla zone, we mean a revolutionized area, which, though under the colonial rule of Japanese imperialism in form, is controlled and guided by the guerrillas in practice. The establishment of more semi-guerrilla zones and their consolidation at home have a tremendous bearing on creating political and military strongholds and rear bases to expand and develop the anti-Japanese armed struggle deep into the homeland and on rapidly enlarging and strengthening the ranks of the AJP-GE. Once we establish and consolidate more semi-guerrilla zones at home, we can train our basic masses to be dependable reserves of the guerrillas through the revolutionary organizations, and rapidly expand and strengthen the ranks of the AJP-GE with these masses. By sending armed teams of the Korean Revolutionary Army to different localities in the homeland, we laid mass foundations for the revolutionary struggle and exerted a revolutionary influence on our people. We dispatched a large number of political workers to Onsong, Poryong, Musan, Kyangwon, and other places in the homeland. and, in keeping with the prevailing situation, have actively promoted the work of forming various revolutionary organizations in which the broad masses have been embraced and educated in the aims of the revolution to turn the areas into semi-guerrilla zones. So, in the Onsong area, 2 underground revolutionary organizations have been formed, and the transformation of the masses in a revolutionary fashion is being conducted vigorously. Basing yourselves on the successes already achieved, you should further build up the Onsong area into a semi-guerrilla zone. Here, the class composition of the population is good, and quite a few people have been awakened to the aims of the revolution. Moreover, the area is near the guerrilla bases, or liberated area, and has very advantageous terrain conditions. You can go deep into the homeland from Menti Wangje, along the Hamgong Mountains via Mitiyung. In addition, you must set up semi-guerrilla zones in many other parts of the homeland and consolidate them. In order to form semi-guerrilla zones, the guerrillas must conduct combat activities more energetically along the border. Meanwhile, the underground revolutionary organizations at home must launch a powerful struggle to rally and revolutionize the broad masses opposed to Japanese imperialism. Only when we have the revolutionized masses can we strengthen our revolutionary forces by relying on them, paralyze the ruling machinery of Japanese imperialism, and develop various forms of anti-Japanese struggle. Therefore, we must thoroughly revolutionize the great majority of the masses in the areas intended for semi-guerrilla zones. To form the semi-guerrilla zones, it is necessary to establish secret communications places and various other places for activity wherever necessary, by using the favorable terrain of the wooded areas. If semi-guerrilla zones are built up in this way all over the homeland, we will be able to expand and develop the anti-Japanese armed struggle deep into the homeland, using these zones. What is necessary next is to firmly rally the whole nation as a single political force in the struggle against Japanese imperialism. In order to expand and develop the armed struggle into the homeland and win the historic cause of national liberation, we must firmly unite all sections of the masses with anti-Japanese inclinations. Under the banner of the Anti-Japanese National United Front, based on the work of Pence, this is a correct step in the light of the character of our revolution, which is designed mainly for national liberation from Japan, and the actual situation in which the reactionary offensive of Japanese imperialism against the Korean people is being intensified more than ever before. In fact, only when we unite the broad sections of the anti-Japanese forces and fight relying on them can we isolate and weaken the counter-revolutionary forces, completely smash the reactionary offensive of the Japanese imperialists, and achieve the historic cause of liberating the country. A broad section of the petty bourgeoisie, to say nothing of the workers and peasants, are taking part in the struggle against the Japanese imperialists. Even some manufacturers are now harboring anti-Japanese sentiments as they become impoverished, and more of them go bankrupt with each passing day because of the predatory colonial policy of Japanese imperialism. We should rally all those who hate the Japanese imperialists and truly desire the country's liberation under the banner of the Anti-Japanese National United Front, irrespective of property status, education, residence, or sex. We must set up many mass organizations of different types in order to rally the whole nation into a single political force. In my opinion, we will be able to form legal and illegal revolutionary organizations under various names to suit the specific features of the given areas and localities. We must set up numerous mass organizations in various forms in the northern border area and in all other parts of the country too, so as to rally the broad masses. The worker peasant union now active in the Onsong area has failed to unite the broad sections of the anti-Japanese masses. I think it had better consider changing its name so as to draw more revolutionary members of the masses into the organization in the future. We must not only unite vast numbers of anti-Japanese people in organizations, but also constantly educate them in a revolutionary way. There are various forms of giving the masses revolutionary education. We can heighten the revolutionary ardor of the masses through secret reading sessions or press activity and educate them in the aims of the revolution through night schools or informal explanations. We must educate the masses constantly and actively through a proper combination of these diverse forms. The educational work must be subordinated to the solution of the tasks arising from our revolutionary mission. Therefore, we should explain to the masses the aggressive crimes of the Japanese imperialists, the exploitative nature of the landlords and the pro-Japanese capitalists, our people's struggle against Japanese imperialism, and the ways and means of struggle against the enemy. This will give them a clear understanding of the enemy and spur them to take an active part in the revolutionary struggle. Also, the education of different sections of the masses must be conducted, taking into consideration their specific features and levels of consciousness, and be carried out actively and prudently in conditions of illegality, as the Japanese imperialists are engrossed in a savage reign of terror. By uniting the broad masses under the anti-Japanese banner and educating them in a revolutionary way, as I have mentioned, we should create revolutionized areas all over the country, where large masses of the people will be able to participate actively in various forms of anti-Japanese struggle. From now on, we should closely combine mass movements with the preparatory work for the expansion and development of the armed struggle into the homeland. The expansion and development of the armed struggle into the homeland will play a decisive role in exerting a revolutionary influence on the people. The expansion and development of the armed struggle into the homeland will play a decisive role in exerting a revolutionary influence on the people at home, strongly inspiring them to take part in the anti-Japanese struggle, and finally eradicating the colonial rule of Japanese imperialism. The mass struggle is very important in dealing blows at the colonial rule of Japanese imperialism, tempering the masses in a revolutionary way and creating favorable conditions for expanding and developing the armed struggle. However, this alone is not enough to overthrow the system of the colonial rule of the Japanese imperialist marauders and win the historic cause of the country's liberation. That is why we raise, as an important matter, the linking of the mass struggle with the work of expanding and developing the anti-Japanese armed struggle into the homeland. Underground revolutionary organizations and political workers must actively organize and wage in towns, farming and fishing villages, at home diverse forms of anti-Japanese struggle of the masses, in coordination with the anti-Japanese armed struggle. In this way, we will give a decisive blow to the Japanese imperialist aggressors, expand and strengthen the mass foundation of the revolution, and accelerate the destruction of Japanese imperialism. The revolutionaries and the populace at home must make all possible efforts to aid the guerrillas and the people in the guerrilla bases. First, they should provide the guerrillas with timely information about the enemy's situation. With a view to guaranteeing the combat activity of the guerrillas, they should accurately reconnoiter and inform them promptly of the disposition of the repressive facilities and government organizations of Japanese imperialism, such as gendarmeries, police stations, border customs posts, police substations at ferries, county and sub-county offices, and the movements of the Japanese armed forces. For the present, they must reconnoiter and send in information related to the maneuvers of the Japanese imperialists so that we may attack the enemy's strongholds along the border. Meanwhile, the revolutionaries in the homeland should organize and give more positive aid to the guerrilla units and the people in the guerrilla bases. As in the past, so also in the future, they should rouse the revolutionary organizations and the people at home to action to secure greater amounts of necessary war supplies and consumer goods, and send them to the guerrilla bases by various means, using vantage points and natural conditions. This will inspire the guerrilla units and the people in the guerrilla bases, and contribute greatly to the advancement of the anti-Japanese armed struggle. Comrades, we must mobilize the efforts of the whole nation and wage a long and bloody struggle to crush the brigandish Japanese imperialists in order to achieve the historic cause of the country's liberation. If we are to be successful in this difficult and complicated revolutionary task, we must have a general staff of the revolution. That is why the founding of a Marxist-Leninist party is the most urgent and important task for us communists. To found the party, we should train and expand the ranks of the communists who have been thoroughly armed with Marxist-Leninist ideas and have been tried and tested in actual struggle. Only then can we firmly rally the revolutionary masses around them as the backbone and correctly carry out complicated revolutionary tasks. We must give the factionalist idea and other hostile ideas no chance to gain a foothold in the revolutionary organizations. Through these organizations also, we must make energetic endeavors to train cadres who have been armed thoroughly with Marxist-Leninist ideas. I hope you will make a great contribution to expanding and developing the armed struggle into the homeland and hastening the day of national liberation.